Hey guys, Shane here, so welcome to this painting tutorial, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at painting a member of the 2nd Ranger Battalion as they stormed ashore on Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6th, 1944. So this figure is from Mark 35 Productions, and I just replaced the head with that of a hornet's head. I have a full video detailing how I paint faces and skin, so link in the video description for that. So starting off with this, we're going to start by taking a mixture of model color khaki mixed with a small amount of Russian uniform and a tiny touch of German field grey, and that's going to give us this lovely kind of greeny beige color. We don't want it too light, but we don't want it too dark either, and this is going to be our base layer here. So I'm going to start working this in. I've mixed a small amount of water into my wet palette here just to thin this paint out ever so slightly so it flows into the various details. So I'm being careful to just build up my layers ever so slightly and try not to do it in one layer. And if you want to make this coat a little bit darker, to make it more of like a deeper kind of woolen or kind of like a deep olive color, just add a bit more of the German field grey into your mixture. Now to base coat his HBT trousers, we're just going to take some model color field grey, again from Vallejo. Again, I just mix a tiny amount of water into my paint just to thin it down, and it'll take me about a coat or two just to build up this in a neat and even layer. This colour is a little bit too light for you, which looking back on it, the field grey on its own is a little bit too light, so I would recommend mixing in maybe a deep green or even like an olive drab actually. A small touch of olive drab mixed into your field grey here would actually work quite well for the colour, but in this case we're just going to roll with our field grey. Even though this is quite a nice figure, there is a little bit of kind of sponginess and it is a very busy sculpt. Kind of work around that, I have to keep my paint very thin because I don't want to swamp any detail with paint, and the creases are a little bit exaggerated, so I'm just slowly building up these layers, so the blocking process does take a bit longer because of this. So to do his life belt or life preserver, we're just going to take some model color khaki, again tinning it down just with a little bit of water, and we're switching down to a slightly smaller brush. In this case is number 3, and I'm just going to start cutting in this detail. So the interesting challenge with painting US equipment is there's a lot of drabs and a lot of khakis and kind of like buff colors that can basically make the model look kind of boring and plain. So we're going to experiment using different mixtures to mix up our tones and hues here just to create an interesting model or figure without completely undoing the actual colour of the original equipment, or at least keeping it as true or as faithful as we can. So now I'm going to start cutting in his gaiters, and I'm just going to mix up a small amount of khaki and German camo beige, again from Vallejo. And I'm just going to start slowly working this in. I'm going to try to be careful now to keep within the lines here. You know, I don't want to keep having to come back and forth to fix errors. And I'm just slowly working up and building up the gaiters. Again, I'm sorry, a little bit this is off camera, but it's just an awkward part to film really, so I'm kind of doing my best here to keep it in frame. So this is actually turning into a very deceptively difficult part of the figure to paint. I was very surprised with the amount of paint that the two gaiters just totally soaked up. There's a lot of creases here, the lace work that goes up along the edge of the gaiters that brings both halves together is quite pronounced and took up a load of paint. So I probably maybe over-tinned it. However, it's better just to layer up rather than put down a massively thick layer and then lose control of it and just destroy your work. So now to do the gas buzzard, which is this armband here, I'm going to just take some khaki and I'm also going to mix in a tiny amount of English uniform. Again, all these colours are from Vallejo, and that gives it this weird brownish beige colour. So the interesting thing with this bit of equipment was it was basically a treated paper. It looks almost kind of glossy or satin in appearance. It looks like almost like greaseproof paper to a certain degree. These can vary in colour. Sometimes it can be a light green colour. And basically what they were was if the Germans released gas on the invasion beaches, as there was some fear they might do if they were desperate enough to stop the invasion, that these would change colour, I believe, and it would give the assault waves and all other assault troops, including the paratroopers, they also carried these as well. It would give them time to get their masks on if they were exposed to chemical weapons. So now moving on to his boots, we're just going to take some model colour flat brown, which is a fantastic and rich brown colour. It's fantastic for doing rifle stocks and natural leather. And I'm just going to thin this down with a tiny amount of water and slowly start cutting this in. As we're working on smaller and smaller details, you will notice my brush sizes will start changing, so I'll start swapping between different brush sizes, and I will try to kind of let you know what brushes I'm using. So now I'm using, I believe this is a number 1 rigger brush, so it's a long bristled brush with a fine tip. And again, having a few brushes in your tool set is a good idea, just to circulate them as you need them rather than trying to do difficult or kind of tricky jobs with a massive brush. It just puts a lot of pressure on yourself. So it's just having the right tool for the job will make a big difference to your painting endeavors, I found, especially in my own experience. So again, just working the figure around, just trying to get all these angles in. And now we're moving on to his web gear, and for this we're going to be using a mixture of different colours. So for his backpack, his M29 Doughboy backpack, we're just going to be using straight German camo beige. My real objective here is I want to keep this kind of khaki or canvasy colour consistent throughout his web gear, because most of the time their kit was this kind of colour. Sometimes it might be a little bit more on the greenish spectrum, so you do have a little bit of flexibility in colour in what you want to use. Again, just having some good reference material at hand is a big plus here. But I'm going to kind of keep on this kind of canvas and khaki spectrum, but I don't want to use the same colour for all of this, otherwise it's just going to kind of get lost and look a bit boring. Now for the tea shovel cover, I'm just going to take some flat model colour khaki. Again, just being very careful to cut this in. As you can see, I've switched down to my rigger brush, so I'm going to really be sticking with my number 1 rigger for a lot of this work here, just to kind of keep my brush control and keep things neat. I'm also just going to mix a tiny amount of the khaki and German beige together here to create this colour for the mess tin pouch here that's on top of the tea cover here, or the tea shovel cover should I say. Again, it just breaks it up, it makes a slightly different hue and shade of colour. So for the actual tea shovel itself, we're just going to take some model colour German uniform, which is just kind of light olivey green. I'm just going to tin it down again with a little bit of water and carefully paint this in. I don't want to get anywhere I don't want. So you will notice in this video I will be using a lot of the same colours, just in different combinations and mixtures. I tend to use several of the same colours to kind of achieve what I want, as they're very versatile, you know. So it's good to have, like, you know, your German camel beige, your sunny skin tone, khaki, field grey are great colours to have regardless what nation or what era of model you paint, because they're very versatile in mixing. Now I'm also going to take this German uniform colour as well and paint a scabbard of either his bayonet or combat knife that he's got strapped to his leg. Now to paint the ammo bag that's hanging off his hip, I'm just going to take some Russian uniform. Again, tin it down with a little bit of water and start working this up. This colour did go down a little bit transparently, so I do have to put a layer or two just to build this colour up. So you can see our Ranger is slowly taking shape. It's one of the reasons why I liked this figure, because there's a lot of equipment, and I always kind of envisioned the assault troops on D-Day being absolutely laden down, as the accounts seem to suggest they were, with a combat kit and assault gear to try to breach the defences in Normandy. Adds a lot of character to these figures. So now moving on to his M5 assault gas mask case, which is the rubber bag that's on his chest, and for this we're just going to take a mixture of German grey and mix in a small amount of Vallejo's, I believe it's dark blue grey if I remember correctly, and that's going to be the kind of the rubber bag shade that we're going to use. And we're just going to slowly cut this in, again being careful to keep it within the lines if you like. So again, this is a very iconic piece of D-Day equipment. Both the assault troops on the beaches and the airborne troops were all issued with these. Often you see with the US paratroopers, they'll have these strapped to their leg. And also too, you will actually see these after the invasion quite a bit too. Even though the threat of gas was more or less discarded, however the soldiers retained these bags as they were totally waterproof, so they would throw away their gas mask and use it then for transporting things like cigarettes and all that stuff that they didn't want to get wet. So moving on to arguably the most tricky part of this entire project, webbing. So I'm going to be using mixtures of German uniform, I'm going to be using the khaki colour, I'm going to be using the Russian uniform colour, and the German camo beige, just for different straps and equipment. It's up to you what you want to pick. What made this difficult is the sculpting in certain places on this figure is not great. It's quite spongy in certain places, and the webbing is one of these. At times it's a little bit hard to identify where these straps are going, so again I just have to take my time here and start working my way out. And as you can see, I've switched down to a very small brush here. I'm using a double zero brush now just to slowly start cutting in this detail. So I'm going to start switching into these different colours. So the main straps I'm really just going to use khaki. And then for the smaller straps that go around his arms, which are from the M5 gas mask case, I'm actually going to use German uniform for that, as they tend to be like a kind of green, kind of canvasy colour. So again, I'm sorry that a lot of this isn't really in shot. I have to maneuver this figure just in some awkward angles just to be able to see what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out where these lines actually go. So now with our base coats allowed to dry, we're going to start adding our shading layer. In this case, we're going to be using a wash from Citadel called Agra's Earthshade. And I'm going to be applying this to basically the entire model except the skin and the M5 gas mask bag. Everything else is going to get a coat of this wash. As you can see, I'm laying it down quite liberally. I'm putting this down quite heavy. But I am also being very careful to ensure that I spread it out and try to keep the coat as even as possible. So with the wash allowed to dry, we're going to start highlighting our jacket. So we're going back to our base colours, our Russian uniform, our khaki and field grey mix. And if you have this on a wet palette, you can just basically go straight back to your wet palette and use your pre-existing mixture. And we're going to start cutting back in our base colour. So the idea of using a wash to achieve shadow, basically what the wash will do once it's dried, is it will tint your base layer and make it darker, making your preceding layer your basically your shadow layer. And then going back to the same colour, now it's going to be naturally a little bit lighter because of the fact that it's on top of the wash, and that's now going to be our intermediate or middle layer, if you like. So we're just going to start working this in, and we're going to leave the wash in the deepest areas, basically the depths of the creases, any recessed detail, or any other area that we feel that the light would not catch. However, now most of the depth and shade of this model has been established, and it'll also be quite easy now to start picking out details. So you can see that I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. I've also tinted down quite a bit. There's quite a bit of water in my mixture now, and that makes the paint very transparent, which is quite good for highlighting. If the paint is thin and you start working it up, it takes several layers to get a very solid coat, which is great, because what that means is it's a very subtle transition from shadow colour to the light colours. I'm not trying to get it all done in one coat, and I'm just being patient and just allowing the highlights to form themselves by just slowly building up this colour. But I'm really just going to focus on the tops of creases, especially the tops of his shoulders, his collar, and any other kind of pronounced detail that I want to draw attention to. So this step does take quite a bit of time. There was quite a bit of work just to build up this layer and kind of make it look realistic and natural. However, it's just the kind of challenge of operating with these type of lighter colors that are more found with US equipment. But it starts taking shape as you go. So again, just be patient and give yourself the time to do this rather than just trying to rush it. So again, I'm just keeping my paint nice and thin. I'm just slowly working it up. It's going from detail to detail. I'm not really working on one area too much. I'm allowing the paint to dry a couple of seconds before I go back, because I don't want to create any kind of clumping or noticeable brush marks. So I'm just doing a small bit at a time, and then I'll switch to another part of the figure, paint that, and then come back and just kind of going back and forth. So now I'm going to start adding our highlights, or our first layer highlights, to our trousers, and we're just going to go back to our field grey. I still feel I probably should have added a darker green into this mix just to darken it up ever so slightly, as I find I'm a little bit too light in the shade of green we're using here for these woolen trousers. However, again, it's just something to bear in mind if you want to add like an olive drab or dark green to this mix from the off, just to create a darker shade. That would be a very simple option. So just like the jacket, I'm just going back in and start picking out the tops of creases, any area that I feel a lot of light's going to catch or gather, and any area where the material is taut on the figure, so there'll be no real opportunity for shadows to form. And again, just keeping my paint nice and thin, and just a little bit of paint on my brush, and just slowly start working it up. So now give the gaiters a highlight, and it's going to take our original mixture of khaki and German camel beige. And just like both the jacket and trousers, we're just going to start focusing this in to all the areas with the exception of any recessed areas or any creases. So the gaiters do require a lot of time to kind of blend them in and make them look somewhat realistic and interesting at the same time. I really did not like painting them that much, as in these gaiters did drive me a bit mad. They do draw a lot of attention, these colours, especially the gaiters when you have the dark green trousers above them. So I didn't want to rush through it and just kind of make it look bland and boring. But at the same time too, again, the sculpt was kind of working against me here a little bit. There's a lot of creases in the gaiters. In reality, there really shouldn't be too many. But it's just the way it was sculpted, so I have to kind of work around it and try to make it that it's not too stark between highlights and shadow. So now we're going back to our jacket that I basically the final highlights, and we're just going to take our khaki mix that we've already used in our jacket and just mix a tiny amount of model color sunny skin tone. So this is a very good natural color to use for creating highlights out of your mixes. So just put a tiny amount of sunny skin tone into the mix and you just get this very nice and very subtle highlight color. Again, I'm being very careful just to add this to the tops of creases and any other type of detail that I want to pop out. I don't want to go too light with this color. If you go a little bit too mad with the highlight color now, you'll totally change the hue of our jacket and it'll be a little bit too light. Best way to describe highlights is the higher you go, the less you use of that color, if you like. So just being more and more disciplined. Again, I've switched back down to our number 1 rigger brush here, so I can just kind of catch the tops of creases and not too much more. And I'm also just going to focus on the tops of his shoulders and collar with this color as well. Again, keeping the paint nice and thin so it's somewhat transparent, and just working it back so it blends into the darker color that we've already established beneath it. So with our jacket highlighted, now we'll start adding our highlights to our trousers. Again, taking our field grey and just mixing in a tiny amount of sunny skin tone. We want this to be very subtle, especially on the trousers. And I'm really going to be focusing this colour on his knees and on the edges of the pockets just to kind of trace them and help pop them out from the rest of the trousers. And just again, I want this to be subtle. I don't want to go too light here, otherwise it'll just totally undo the shadow work we've done already. It'll completely change the hue of our trousers, and they won't really be too accurate to what they would have looked like. just like the jacket, there's a lot of back and forth, and I'm keeping my paint very thin, so even if I do appear to be putting this colour down on a lot of points of this figure, it's very transparent, so it's not too stark, and I'm not undoing the deeper colours that we've established in previous steps, so it's just just tracing the pockets, just trying to pop out some of these very pronounced seams and folds that the sculptor has put into the figure here, just to draw a bit of attention to them. And then on the tops of these folds and creases here at the back of the trousers. So now with the uniform mostly highlighted and finished, we're going to start working our way onto the equipment. So we're just going to start adding a basic highlight to the life preserver, and for that we're just going back to our original colour of khaki, which I find is more than adequate for adding these type of highlights. I don't want to make this too light, so I'm just going to go back to the first base colour and leave it like that. Again, I've tinted down with a little bit of water. I'm just going to slowly start edging out this detail here. Again, I'm switching down to a very small tip brush here. Again, this is a 0, just to do some of this more finer work. There's a lot of hoses and plumbing on these life preservers that we're going to come back and paint in later, but right now we're just going to focus on the canvas or the khaki colour that we're going for here. And I'm just going to leave the washed areas in the deepest recesses, just to draw a little bit of visual interest. So again, I'm trying to figure out where certain lines are going, because in certain parts of the sculpt the detail gets a bit spongy, so I'm just trying to maneuver the model in such a way where I can see what I'm doing, and just slowly building up our colour here. Again, try not to do it in one coat of paint, but just slowly and gradually over several coats. So I'm also going to take our khaki and start highlighting the khaki web gear that we've painted in. Again, just leaving the washed areas and the recessed areas and parts that we feel where a lot of shadow might form. So I'm still using our 0 brush here just to get into these finer areas. You'll also see me painting it onto his sleeve. The reason why I did that was just that my nail chipped some of the paint, so I just wanted to do a little touch up there. So for the ammo bag, we're just going to use a mixture of our Russian uniform and a small amount of sunny skin tone. And we're just going to start focusing this into the high details and start tracing the edges of the bag here. It'll just kind of give it more of a canvassy look, because I felt that the green was just a little bit too dark. So I just want to come straight in and just give it a very light green highlight, and just use the darker shadows. I don't mind having stark contrast in highlight and shadows as long as they're kind of well blended in together. So I don't really mind going a little bit aggressive in the highlight, especially on something like this where I don't want the ammo bag here to get lost in the trousers, because the greens are quite similar. So by just making that, by just making the bag that bit more starker in its transition between light and dark, it'll just help pop it out and make it stand out. So now we're going to go back to our backpack, and we're going to go back to our German camo beige. And I'm going to tint this down again with quite a bit of water. And you can see I've switched back to my rigger brush here. So this is our I believe, #1 rigger. And I'm just going to start basically edge highlighting. So I'm going to start around the flap of his 1928 Doughboy backpack. And I'm just going to start as picking out the edge. And then I'm going to start working on the tops of creases and any other type of flat details that, would not really focus or create much shadow. So if you start at one point, as you'll go, you'll kind of naturally just begin to suss out where these highlights go. So I'm just going to start focusing it in here, because there's a lot of flat detail here. And by keeping our paint nice and thin, we just get a very nice and gentle transition into highlight. I'm going to put a little bit too much paint on my brush here, so I'm just going to clean off my brush and then just take what's there on the figure and just try to blend that back. I'm also going back to our khaki color here and just painting some of the highlights on the T-shovel cover. And then going back to our base color that we used for the mess tin cover here. If I remember correctly, it's a khaki and English uniform mix, or is it a German camo beige and English uniform mixture? It's one or the other, or whatever you used for your one, and we're just going to start cutting that in, again keeping the paint a bit thin, so we have a nice kind of transparentness just to help us with that transition. I also bear mention now that I've also highlighted the gas hazard off camera, because I forgot I wasn't filming it, and I just went back to the original base color just off the wet palette and tinted down with a little bit of water and painted that back into the gas hazard on his arm there. So basically exact same colors we did once the wash was dried, or before the wash should I say, and then just use it as a very basic highlight. So now moving on to his boots. So we're going to take our flat brown and we're going to mix in a tiny amount of red leather, again all from Vallejo model colour, and it's going to give us this lovely rich leather colour that has a nice kind of warmth to it without it being too overpowering. And we're going to start working this onto the toes of the boot and the heels, and we're just going to start working it in, again tinning it down to slightly transparent, and this gives us this lovely warm highlight. I often use this colour too for painting rifle stocks, which I'll use for his M1 carbine that unfortunately I forgot to film, but again it's just this lovely rich kind of naturally leathery colour without it being too stark or too intense. And by just adding layers, I can regulate how intense that highlight is. So then we'll start working on the buttons and the buckles and the buttons for our uniform and equipment, and for that we're just going to use Vallejo model color German camo black brown. Especially with a lot of the HBT equipment, the buttons were actually like a plastic rather than like a metal, so I find these colors are actually quite good for making that kind of like dark brown or colour that those buttons tend to be. I'm also going to use it for painting in the buckles on his web gear as well. Again, I switch down to a double zero or zero brush here, and just to give a nice fine point just to work in this colour. And I have thinned it down with a little bit of water. You'll also notice when I swing the figure around again, I've painted in the hoses of his life preserver, and for that I just used straight up German grey from model colour. So now we're going to start painting in metal fittings on the life preserver, and that's going to take a little bit of light grey, mix it into the dark grey just to create this light colour here. So these would have been like the valves for the air system that would have inflated the life preserver if the soldier or sailor or paratrooper had to go into water. So again, it's just like a non-metallic effect I wanted it for. So now we're going to take some gloss varnish, and there's a reason for this, because we're going to start adding some decals to give some rank and unit markings for a figure. So we're just going to lay down some Vallejo gloss varnish to both his arm and his helmet. After all, this is a ranger of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, and they have a very iconic unit marking on their helmet especially, which is the sometimes yellow or orange diamond of the 2nd Rangers. So the decals we're going to be using are from Passion Model, and this is their US Army badge and insignia set. So I'm just going to remove the markings we want. In this case it's going to be the diamond marking on the rear of the helmet with the horizontal white bar for that of an NCO. I was going to take a rank marking here. In this case, I'm going to give him a corporal or a technical corporal's rank marking. And the single blue Ranger flash as well. Now what I found working with these figures, or with these decals, is they're quite stiff and tough to work with. They don't want to conform. So I had to use a lot of microsaw and set to get these to sit down. Now the helmet doesn't want to focus, and also the helmet is also from Dragon models from my spare box. I just had to bore out the plastic in the center to get it to fit the head. And here we have the Ranger flash, which is the blue diamond on his left shoulder. So I have laid down a couple of coats of micro set and saw just to try to get the decals to conform to the the jacket and the helmet, and like I was saying, it did take about 2 days of several coats of dental softener just to get these things to work. So the unit marking, the branch marking, so in this case he's Ranger Flash, is quite high on his shoulder, and then the rank marking is right beneath it. I also created a very simple chin strap wrapped around the back of his helmet with a bit of tammy tape, and just took a buckle from my spare bits box and affixed it with a bit of super glue. And I'm just going to take some of our khaki colour and just carefully paint that in, and then a bit of our German camo black brown for the buckle. I also painted up the helmet using olive drab, and then just stippled a little bit of German camo beige and a little bit of German uniform in a very light manner just to create a bit of wear and tear, and then took a little bit of model colour aluminium just to do the bit of wear on the lip of the helmet, as often that tends to get worn back to the bare steel of the helmet. Again, I didn't mean to film this, but the camera just could not focus on it for whatever reason, so unfortunately we just had to do without. And just add a little bit of shade and texture. I'm just going to apply a small amount of wash to it as well. So now the final touches. We are going to add a coat of matte varnish, also going to give him his weapons and his Bandolore torpedo. Painted these off camera. The rifles is painted using flat brown and the red brown red leather kind of combo mix, and then the Bandolore torpedo is just a little bit of reflective green with a bit of wash that was wiped away just to create a bit of a grimy effect. So again, it's going to give him a couple of coats of filet home matte varnish just to kind of, one, to protect the model, and two, will kind of bring everything together and make everything nice and matte. Also, just to create a little bit of kind of water effect, I'm just going to take a bit of gloss varnish and spray it onto his feet and the lower part of his legs, just to simulate that he's been running through water. Now, if I really wanted to, I could have taken this a step further and mixed in a darker green to the base of his pants just to create like a wet material effect, which is something we might do if we do another Omaha or Utah Beach figure, which I do intend to do again. So with that, guys, our Ranger is ready to hit the beach. So I really hope, guys, you enjoyed it. I did wanted to get this video done for the anniversary D-Day, but unfortunately I couldn't get it done in time. So I do hope that the delay was worth it, and I really did enjoy working on this figure. I want to say a big thank you to my patrons whose support allowed me to pay for and get this model. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed it. Happy modeling as always, my friends, and I'll catch you in the next video. I have been Shane. Bye bye.